Now, it's a little bit of a problem, because both of us are called Andrea. Can you imagine organizing such an event without... We try to tell people that we should be called the Andreas, but then we actually have one German colleague called Andreas, so it didn't help. And eventually, we settled for Renda Bitnerova, Andrea R&B, which is, since both of us like music very much, pretty groovy, right? Like rhythm and blues. So we try to keep you alive a little bit with this. Welcome again to the Ideas Lab. Many of you have been at the warm-up session this morning. I think it was very interesting in terms of stage setting. Now we get into the live action. Live action also for you, because this event is unique in nature. We try to make it an event where everybody is a protagonist, right? Everybody is a main character. And this is, I will explain a little bit later after I've given the floor to Andrea. I will explain a little bit more what this means in practice for you, and if you can play the game along with us. But Andrea, please, can you walk us through a little bit the format, what's going on here? How can people find their orientation? Over to you, Andrea, and then you have to say, thank you, Andrea, and I say, you're welcome, Andrea.
Thank you, Andrea. Anyway, I have to have notes, because I feel like at least over the past week, I lost a lot of brain cells due to the organization of the event. So you have to excuse me, otherwise I wouldn't be able to do this. I think there's a reason they don't ask organizers normally to speak, you know, because we're already thinking like of the afternoon, of the evening, everything else. Anyway, if you have attended before the event, I think you know it pretty well. We haven't deviated much from the format, which is you have the plenaries, you have the lab sessions that really make the core of our event. But if you are new here, show of hands, are there people that are attending for the very first time? Wow, okay. Okay, that's amazing. There are a lot of you.
I don't know if it's amazing. People don't come back?
To be fair, we also don't always invite the same people. We also like to spice it up. But anyway. So for the format, if you are new here and there are so many of you, it's amazing. Let me tell you that this is not your typical Brussels conference. Not that anything is wrong with those, with our competition, but we try to be a bit different, which is that this is a flexible, informal event where you don't sit in a plenary all day long, listen to session after session, but you are very flexible in what you want to do. That means you can sit here, then go to a lab session, you can even go to different lab sessions at the same time, and you can also network during the breaks. So it's really a format that we are proud of, that has proven to be great over the years, and I mean, so many of you are here already, so I think we're doing something right. And also, unlike, I should be careful. I'm sorry, I'm a very theatrical person, so I have to tone it down a little bit. What was I saying? Yes, so unlike other conferences as well, we are bringing people from beyond Brussels. So you will meet a lot of colleagues that are coming from the member states, also not member states of the European Union, but we have even visitors from the US, other countries around the world, so it's really a great opportunity for you to meet some new interesting faces. As last year, we are hosting an evening debate at Beaux-Arts, where we will have a light dinner reception, drinks, and it will be a very nice, chill event just like last year. And we also have some new features this year as well, and we will talk about them a little bit more in detail later, but just to give you an idea, we have an event app. How many of you have downloaded the event app? Okay, it could be a little bit better, right?
It's the same people that are new, I think. Yeah.
Good point, good point. Okay, then we're going back to the ideas part of Ideas Lab, and Andrea will talk a bit more about it. We are displaying projects and initiatives in the common space. Andrea will talk about it as well. And unlike last year, no pre-registration is needed for the lab sessions, so you are really free to go to whatever topic you're interested in. If you find the discussion dull, you can switch to a different session. It's really flexible. You do you. Now over to you again.
Thank you, Andrea. You're welcome, Andrea. Now, what have we thought about the Ideas Lab for this year? First of all, one thing that I would like to say is that This is not just the second edition, meaning there's some people that were here last year. No, this is the 11th edition of the Ideas Lab. And so we are starting our new second decade of events with the Ideas Lab. And it has a peculiarity, not only that it starts a new series. It has a peculiarity. It is that the first year that we are not organizing the Ideas Lab under the scientific coordination of Daniel Gross, who has been, if you wish, the father of the Ideas Lab, has been with us directly at CEPS as Director of Research for many years. Over the past years, even if he was not Director of Research anymore, he continued to organize the Ideas Lab as a scientific coordinator. I don't know if Daniel is in the room. He is there. I just wanted to ask you to join me in a big applause for Daniel. Now, this, of course, is a big responsibility for us, that we inherit a format that has been very successful over the past years. And we tried to make some changes. But then, of course, at the end, tomorrow afternoon, we will ask Daniel if he agrees with the changes, or if he thinks, like, why don't you just go back to my own initial design. One, I'll say this in a provocative way, but Daniel doesn't need to take it personally, is that the big change this year, we tried to make the Ideas Lab, paradoxically, ironically, spectacularly, acrobatically, an Ideas Lab. Meaning, we try to transform this into a conference where there are some more normal, traditional panels, where there is a topic that is chosen and people come and offer their different views on that issue, and there is a sort of somehow an attempt to compose the different views and come to some findings. Some of the sessions that you might have seen in the program are sessions where people actually come and present new ideas. Meaning we have called some people from inside CEPS, but also some non-CEPS researchers to come and test their ideas, which we have validated to some extent before, in the sense that we've had a conversation about them. We have asked these proposers to present these ideas by shooting a short video. You'll see those videos in the website and in the app, those of you, not few, that have downloaded the app. We also asked them to write a commentary where they actually detail what is in this idea and why the idea would be important or worth taking on board. And so you will see 1/3, actually, 8 of 24 of the parallel sessions. You will see this potpourri of parallel sessions 3 times over this couple of days are actually about these new ideas. So if you are in the mood for even more debate and discussion, and or trying to offer your contribution to better shape those ideas, please go there and help our researchers, or also the external researchers that come and propose their ideas, to sharpen them, to revamp them in a way that makes them more impactful and more useful for the future of Europe and the world. It's an interesting cohort, right? We go from the young researchers in their early 20s to, I've learned this word on my skin, more seasoned. And when someone called me more seasoned years ago, I understood what was going on. More seasoned researchers in their mid-80s, okay? We have perfect gender balance, and we have also a wide variety of topics, from extending emissions trading to the Western Balkans, to the digital public infrastructure, to AI and building a European large language model, to setting up a commissioner on enforcement and implementation in the single market, and so on and so forth. Privacy data transfers between the EU and the US. There's so many, many different ideas, and of course, ideas on accession. Because as you've heard, those of you that have been here in a warm-up session this morning, and you will hear on and on again, if anything, the topic of the many that we deal with this year, if there is one topic that is really dominating all of us and the discussions, and it's permeating most of our discussions, is the topic of security, defense, enlargement, and the war in Ukraine. I think this is perhaps a thread that you will see, not surprisingly, in many of these sessions. So ideas and commentaries. We, as you see, try to keep a relatively playful mode in this conference. We are deeply saddened at the same time of what we see happening around us. So we make no mystery about this, and we will keep discussing these things. We take it very seriously, even when we make jokes, but we take it very seriously. We expect a lot from this conference, because we want this conference to come up with concrete ideas and solutions. It's not the only thing that we showcase. We showcase other things. Those of you, well, actually, we made it obligatory, compulsory, to walk through some of the tables that we have outside at the entrance, ground floor and first floor. You see already some strange graphs as you come in. You see tables where we showcase some of the big projects that CEPS is part of. We at CEPS are, well, perhaps it's not the best way of calling ourselves, but sometimes we're defined as a generalist think tank, not because, hopefully, because we are shallow, but because we cover many, many different topics. We're not a specialized think tank. And you will see this, the richness of the topics that are displayed. Just give you one example. CEPS is part of probably 18 or 19 Horizon Europe projects where we go deeper into research. We don't just convene events, what many think tanks do. Many of us are academics and want to go into the details, even technical details of the topics we deal with. Increasingly, we look at a wide range of topics for Europe and beyond. But lately, as I was, for some reason that hopefully people will understand over time, or hopefully is a good reason, I took over the position of Director of Research in November last year. And part of this has been revamping the ability of CEPS to work with data and to go deeper in data-driven research without forgetting the beauty of social science research, but actually putting them together in a unique blend. And a protagonist and a main addition to CEPS that is helping us making this happen is a person that I'm going to call on stage, who's our chief data scientist. Again, since the same day I took over as Director of Research, November 1st, this is the one unique, unmatched Pierre-Alexandre Ballon. I'll invite him on stage. Pierre-Alex, you tell us a little bit what people can find on these data visualizations that you see there.
Does that work? That work? No?
Yeah, now it does.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrea. Thank you so much, Andrea. And welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to welcome some old friends and hopefully make some new ones at the end of the event. That's really one of the major reasons why we all travel and come together. Indeed, I'm very lucky, honored to be leading the data science initiative here at CEPS. And what we do basically is to try to turn big policy problems, big policy challenges into a data science solution. Because the AI revolution, the data science revolution is something you've seen everywhere, but in policy, if I want to be a bit provocative. Like in business, you see that a bit in science, but in policy, there are some amazing data scientists working every day on these topics, but the gap is huge. So we're trying to bridge this gap, and we're trying to really be at the interface of domain expertise, policy problems, and trying to find data science solution. And one of the very fun things that we do is to create, indeed, data visualization. So you were a bit forced to grow. We were like kind of funneled to go through 5 visualizations that basically showcase some of our projects. We have fragmented intelligence that is, according to someone that was looking at it this morning, very worrying. That's it, basically, that you see how disconnected the system of innovation in Europe is, and then we have to find solution to solve that. You have another one that basically shows how much spending, how much dollars, how much VC is going to the US and Chinese startups compared to the European one, while if you look at the spiky maps, and these big spikes, you see that actually Europe is doing really, really well when it comes to science. And that will spark the beginning of a conversation, hopefully that we can have in these 2 days. We have an amazing team of data scientists that are during every network break at this booth, and I will be there as well. So please come to us if you're interested in this type of topics. It would be lovely to discuss and explain a bit how this data visuals, what they mean also in terms of policy. Last thing, and then I'm out. Surprisingly, we already received a lot of offers to buy this visualization. So if we keep collecting more of that, I think Andrea will have to add one task to this event, which is we're going to have to organize an auction. I mean, we'll have to do that. So thank you so much, and looking forward to interacting with all of you.
Thank you, Pierre-Alex. Thank you, and I'm going to give you the floor in less than 1 minute. I wanted to add one thing. First of all, some of these data visualizations are beautiful for me. They remind me of a Rothko painting, one of them. So indeed, if you don't buy them, we're going to put them on the walls in our office at SEPS, because they're always empty and we don't know how to decorate it, and I've been calling for this for a long time. There is also another table outside, and then our colleague Dylan is there, and Julie, I think, is also there, and there's a board where you can actually write your own ideas for the future, because we want to, but this, I'll say more in wrapping up this mini session, we would like, if this goes well, this experiment goes well, to continue eliciting ideas, proposals, and tabling from outside of SEPS, and trying to transform SEPS into a platform where new ideas can be presented. Enough from my end, Andrea, over to you, also because if the auction goes badly, we're going to have to go back to, anyway, the fact that we need to cover costs here. So unless we end up doing the dishes, I think the sponsors that we have are going to be quite interesting and important for us, so you better line them up and tell us what they helped us do. So, Andrea.
Yes. So, as you can imagine, this event is a massive venture, massive undertaking, and I know people always say at events, this event wouldn't be possible without the sponsors, but it's true. Seriously, the good food, the great space, the program, everything is thanks to the sponsors. We love you. We thank you so much. And I will go one by one to tell you how they are specifically contributing to this event. So we have Bertelsmann Stiftung. You may have attended the warm-up session in the morning that was co-organized with them. They will also have a speaker in the lab session on charting the way forward, Ukraine's reconstruction and sustainable recovery, which takes place this afternoon, and their own lab session tomorrow morning on rethinking cohesion policy to ensure an inclusive transition through the European Green Deal. That was a mouthful. On top of that, they are also running their forecasting tool range, which they presented this morning as well. You can also find it on the event app, and they have booth in the foyers. Next, we have Google. They are also hosting a lab session on election integrity, identifying and pre-bunking misinformation narratives in the EU. That's this afternoon, as I mentioned. And they will have a speaker tomorrow in the plenary, scenarios for the future governance of artificial intelligence. We also want to thank PwC, who are hosting a lab session, How Can Tax Help to Facilitate the Net Zero Transition, which is happening this afternoon. And they also have a speaker tomorrow morning in the lab session, From Unemployment Struggles to Labor Market Shortages. BMW has a speaker in the plenary, What Future for Industrial Policy, that's happening tomorrow morning, and also a speaker in the lab session, EU Competitiveness, Industry 5.0, and Civil Law. I'm far from being done. Microsoft has a speaker in the plenary, Scenarios for the Future Governance of Artificial Intelligence, tomorrow afternoon, and is also sponsoring the presence of our young thinkers here at Ideas Lab. EIB has a speaker in the plenary, What Future for EU Industrial Policy, tomorrow morning, and in the lab session, Rethinking Cohesion Policy to Ensure an Inclusive Transition through the European Green Deal. EPRS has a speaker in the lab session, How do we ensure the Green Deal results in a more competitive EU? And you can find their booth in the foyers. I'm almost getting there. Centro Studi sul Federalismo, you can find their booth in the foyers. EFTA, they also have a booth in the foyers. EMEA has a speaker in the lab session, Towards Resilient Supply Chains, Assessing Risks and Preparing Responses, and Will EU-Africa Partnerships on Critical Raw Materials Work? You can also find their booth in the foyers. Eurofound has a speaker in the lab session, Just Transition, Just Skills, Rethinking the Green Labor Market Transition, and last, but certainly not least, Hans Seidel Stiftung. You can find their booth in the foyers. So, big round of applause for our sponsors that made this event happen. And just to quickly tell you something about the event app that we have this year. So you can build your own agenda. I don't know if you noticed this feature, but it's pretty cool. You can look at the sessions that you are interested in, and just like at a music festival, for instance, or that's at least the example I know, not these policy conferences, but music festivals. You can build your own agenda based on what you like. You can also network with others. There are specific topics that you can join, see who else is attending, view the floor plan, because the building might not be so straightforward right away. Read about our sponsors, check the new ideas that Andrea was talking about, and also vote in the forecasting tool by Bertelsmann. And now, Andrea, over to you again.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And,
You're welcome, Andrea.
Okay. Time to wrap up and move on to see that some of our distinguished speakers have already joined us for the plenary. It will be a plenary made of different fireside chats. So again, an innovative format. Just an invitation. Again, you're here at the Ideas Lab. We are here to create and shape and propose and promote new ideas for Europe and beyond. This is the business we're in. For these 2 days, we at CEPS, this is the business that we are in general, always. And in thanking everybody who has made this possible, also for our team, we'll have the time to thank them when we wrap up as well tomorrow. I would like to invite you to play the game with us. And so help us shape these ideas, because we are doing this playfully but very seriously. So thank you very much again. I will give the floor to Karel, who will then introduce our first keynote speaker, the chairwoman of our board. Karel, please come on stage to introduce Ella. And Andreas, we'll see you around.
Thank you. There's still some place here in the front row. For those who are standing there at the back, please take a seat here. There's certainly, I think, 10, 15 places, so please move on. Let's say it's probably nice, let's say that these places are filled as well. So good afternoon, and thank you for Andrea and Andrea for this fantastic introductory session. I hope, let's say, we will meet our promise that we can bring in some new ideas, because there is a need to new ideas always in the policy scene in Brussels. But CEPS has gone also through some other changes over the last year. We have a new chair of our board, and in the first time of the CEPS history, we have a new chairperson who's from the other gender, let's say, than the genders which we had for the first 40 years. Now for the 34th year, we have Ela Benkowska as the chair of our board, let's say, which she was formally installed as our board member on the 3rd of November. We had an event with our previous board member who couldn't be here today, Joaquim Almunia, and her, and we were discussing enlargements. So that was a great occasion, and I can probably invite her to the stage, Ela, and then she gives then the introductory words to you, and then she will introduce, let's say, the Belgian foreign minister as the next speaker, let's say, on the panel. Ela, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Karel. Thank you, Andreas. After those many words that were said about the event itself, I will try to be very brief, because we have a lot of big personalities that will come and share with you their thoughts. So let me start with this, that has been said. I'm quite fresh in CEPS. It's been 5 months since I was elected as chairwoman, the first chairwoman of CEPS board. It is my great pleasure and great honor, and on my behalf, but also and primarily on behalf of the whole CEPS teams, I want to welcome you again on this Idea Labs 11th edition of the Idea Lab. And I hope that we are right saying that after this 10 years of Ideas Labs, of these meetings, it still remains a most high-profile annual event on EU policies. We want to provide you with high-level intellectual forum, as it was said, mostly discussions, so not lecturing, but mostly discussion and free flow of thoughts. But what is really the main and the common sense and the common topic of all of those discussions and chats and exchange of views is that we are Europeans. And I think that this is extremely important in these difficult and turbulent times that we are living in, to understand that we have common views on different difficult topics, of different important issues of the European policies. The discussions, of course, are open, and they wanted to be very active, and we want you to be involved in those discussions with the policymakers, as I said, high-profile policymakers, with the researchers, representatives from industries, from civil society. But what was also important for us while designing this event was to have as many of you as possible from outside of Brussels bubbles. This is really important from outside Brussels bubble, but also from outside Europe. As Andrea said, we have some guests from United States and other places. We have, as you've heard, selected many areas, innovative areas that are evolving around AI, of course, around European reforms, around enlargement, and around energy, around single market. I was commissioner for single market in Juncker Commission, so it is extremely important for me. We had a very good discussion several weeks ago in SEPS on that. So I hope you will enjoy this event, because this is something really, we want it to be a little bit different than ordinary, as I said, lecturing. This is something that needs to be alive, and this is something that needs to bring really new ideas and maybe a new energy towards Europeans in places where you come from, and in Brussels as well, especially before the European election, very important one, when there are many questioning your idea of united Europe. So this is also important in an event from this perspective. As I said, we'll have many distinguished guests and high-profile persons, especially in this opening session. We have Maria Pejcinovic-Buric from Council of Europe. Welcome. We will have my colleagues from the Juncker Commission, executive VIPs of the European Commission, Valdis Dombrovskis and Maroš Šefčovič. But let me welcome, together with you, our first high-level speaker. This is Madam, I hope she's there, Madam Hadja Larbib, Belgian Foreign Minister. Let's welcome her with a applause.
Madam Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Mr. Vice President of the European Commission, SIP's CEO and staff, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to say that it's a great honor for me to be here today for this 11th edition of SEP's Ideas Lab, which is always one of Brussels' most prominent events on EU policies and a perfect occasion to reflect on the state of democracy ahead of the coming European elections. Allow me to start, if I may, with the words of Simone Veil, a great pioneer of women in politics, a champion of human rights, and a source of personal inspiration for my political commitment. She once described democracy as the collective construction that is nourished by debate, exchange, and mutual respect. And that's exactly what we are doing today. Behind the words democracy lie hidden values: respect for human rights, dignity, freedom, equality, rule of law, and the safeguarding of human rights and minorities. These values are universal, and we vigorously defend them because they form the foundation of a society characterized by pluralism, non-discrimination, tolerance, justice, solidarity, and gender equality. This is the vision of the world embraced by Europe, by Belgium, and I know it is shared by our SEPS friends too. A vision where each state has its rightful place and international law serves as the cornerstone, ensuring a delicate balance among nations essential for achieving a global peace. This vision is not an aspiration. It's, by the way, a necessity. In a world where conflicts, or at least disagreements, are inevitable, international law provides a common ground, a set of rules to manage relations and resolve disputes peacefully. By preserving these laws and principles, we respect each other's sovereignty and work towards a collective goal. And these values are facing, you all know, we all know that, growing threats. More than half of the global population resides in countries where political and civil rights are not respected, and democracy is often present only as a facade. From Afghanistan to Iran, Russia to China, the threats to human rights and democracy continue to rise. In the current global landscape, we are witnessing the emergence of power blocs that are more and more divided. On one side, there are those committed to democratic values and the principles of international order, nations that uphold the ideals of freedom, respect for human rights, adherence to international law, and on the other side, we see authoritarian regimes that often act in disregard of international law and the fundamental rights of individuals. Their actions pose a challenge not only to their stability, but for the to their regions, but for the global stability of the world. These challenges also, of course, extend to Europe. Our model of society is admired by many, but feared by others who seek to undermine it. And that is precisely what we have been witnessing over the past 2 years with Ukraine. Among the countries aspiring to join the EU, some, like Ukraine, are from the former USSR bloc and remain under the shadow of Russian threats. Take Moldova, for instance. Russian influence is evident in hybrid aggression, political interference, support for pro-Russian parties, all aimed at destabilizing a nation that, despite challenges, has made remarkable progress on the path to democracy. And just look at what happened a few days ago, when the authorities of Transnistria, a pro-Russian separatist region of Moldova, asked Russia to protective measures in the face of alleged pressure from Chisinau against a backdrop of tension exacerbated by the conflict in neighboring Ukraine. Georgia, another candidate country, also faces a threat to its democratic model. Georgia has officially embraced a European perspective and even enshrined the European project in its constitution. An impressive 85% of the Georgian population aspires for a full integration into Union. And here too, the Russian threat is not limited to the borders, but extends through manipulation and, again, destabilization. These threats to our values and to democracy aren't just outside our borders, they are also within the European Union itself. In some member states, the independence of the justice system, media freedom, and political pluralism are at risk. Challenges that not only threaten democracy, but also weaken the unity and the solidarity within our union. It is our responsibility to respond and protect our common foundation of the rule of law. These growing internal and external threats emphasize the need to constantly strengthen our European societies and democracies. Europe has recognized this need, creating various tools and action plans to promote democracy within its member states. These policies are very much needed. In just 3 months, you know that millions of Europeans will take the polls to elect a new European Parliament. It is a crucial moment for our European democracy, but also a challenging one. We must be cautious to prevent misinformation and keep a close eye on pressure of lobbyist groups. In Brussels, the heart of our European institutions, many groups are active, and not all of them have good intentions. In today's world, safeguarding against foreign influence is really vital. Recent events, such as the Pegasus intelligence revelation, demonstrate that even robust democracies can be exposed to destabilization. This electoral year is crucial for our democracies and the renewal of our institutions. So it is really our role to ensure that the democratic process is free from external interferences. This is why the European Union needs to step up its game. Recently, the Commission proposed its Defense of Democracy package to take on foreign influences on our European democracy. And this demands actions on many fronts. Let me name a few. First, we need clear transparency rules for all interest groups, think tanks, lobbies, and even NGOs. The recent Qatargate scandal underscored how urgent it is as illegal funding found its way through organizations working within the European Parliament. And we need this transparency all across the EU. End of January, we had a first political discussion in the General Affairs Council on the directive on the transparency of interest representation on behalf of third countries. The goal is full transparency across the EU when it comes to lobbying campaigns carried out on behalf of third countries. These transparency rules add up to requirements of GDPR and the Digital Service Act, the famous DSA. Big platforms have to be very, very strict. They have to remove all illegal content, and their platforms cannot be used to amplify or disseminate misleading or false content. These are measures aimed at more transparency, of course, and stronger democratic resilience. The creation of one EU ethic body serves the same objective. Democracy can only thrive when citizens trust the institutions representing them. A common ethic approach for all EU institutions will foster this trust, and I hope we can find an agreement on it very soon. But of course, democracy starts with ensuring every European has the chance to voice their opinion through voting. And this means first strengthening citizens' engagement and make the European political debate more tangible. That is the idea behind the EU electoral law that includes a Spitzenkandidaten system, lowering the voting age to 16 years old and the same voting date in every member state. But we also need to make it easier to vote and consider mobile voting and online voting. How do we vote, for instance, if you live in Madrid but are on vacation in Austria? How do we vote if you are French and live in Berlin? With regards to arrangement for mobile citizens, there are two proposals for Council directive on the table. One for the elections for the European Parliament and one for municipal elections as part of the package on democracy and integrity of European elections. The aim of both proposals is to facilitate the participation of 13 1.5 million mobile citizens in European and municipal elections. As Belgian presidency, we are working, I have to say, tirelessly to reach a consensus that all member states can agree on and that will improve the registration of mobile voters and candidates, their access to information and the accessibility of polling stations. Ladies and gentlemen, democracy is certainly our most valuable asset. It is our defense against extremism, dictatorships, and war. It is our most precious gem that shines brightest in the hands of the people. And I would like to end with Václav Havel, the Czech playwright and former president, who played, as you know, a pivotal role in the democratic revolution in his country. And I quote, "It was the strength of ordinary citizens coming together, demanding their rights and freedoms, that ultimately brought down the walls of oppression and paved the way for democracy." And I can't help but think of the thousands of Russians who were still marching to pay their respect to Alexei Navalny this weekend. I think of the hundreds who were arrested for only lying a rose the day after the death of Putin's most famous opponent. We are not far from them. Not so long ago, just one generation, Europeans stood up against oppression, taking the streets in the name of freedom and democracy. Let their bravery, as those of the Russians and the Ukrainians, inspire us to carry on this noble fight. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Madam Minister. I hope that many of the thought and remarks that Madam Minister have just done will be developed during our discussion and our networking and our chats in the course of today and tomorrow. Let me now ask to the stage Maria Pejčinović-Burić, Secretary General for the Council of Europe, and Karel, I think. Okay, so Maria, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Elżbieta, Chair of the CEPS Board, dear distinguished guests, CEPS friends and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I come from outside of the Brussels bubble, but I'm not a stranger to it, so I worked for pretty part of my career on European integration. But I come from another bubble, which is the Strasbourg bubble. Sometimes they overlap because 27 members of the European Union are the members of the Council of Europe. So let me thank for this great pleasure and honor to take part in this Ideas Lab. Indeed, I've been at previous editions, once as in this capacity, but before that in different capacities. So I'm very glad that this very noble and important events takes place, and that I can just share with you a few ideas from the bubble I come from. As from you, or we all heard from the minister, who is now the chair, the presidency of the Council of European Union, it is given that the range of challenges are facing Europe today. And I think that there has never been a better moment for deep thinking and effective solutions indeed for ideas how to move forward. The wide and varied range of sessions in your program illustrate that part vividly. And in many of these areas, the Council of Europe is hard at work. This May, our organization will celebrate its 75th anniversary. For the past 3/4 of a century, we have sought one simple but most important thing. We sought to build peace, based on the unity of our member states. This is how the Statute of the Council of Europe 75 years ago in London was drafted, and it states that in its first article. So we look through the prism of common standards in human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. A number of these areas were mentioned already by the minister. From our side, central to this has been the European Convention on Human Rights, which every one of our now 46 member states has ratified, and that lays out the rights to which everyone in those member states are entitled by law, alongside with the European Social Charter. The two make the constitution of what the Council of Europe is about. And of course, more than 200 other instruments addressing specific issues. The Convention has transformed lives across our continent, and for the better. This continues today, providing dignity and democratic security for Europeans. But we also know that this approach is under attack. The rise of extreme nationalism and populism, the drift towards democratic backsliding, and the emergence of anti-rights movements. Whether they target women, or LGBTI people, or migrants, all of this threatens to undermine European standards and the national and international institutions that underpin them. It is incumbent on each of us to do what we can do to stop this, to reverse it, and to shape a future defined by progress and not the past. The Council of Europe is determined to play its part in delivering this. Let me give you some examples. On Ukraine, we stand shoulder to shoulder with our member state in its fight for a democratic and European future. Our work includes an action plan on resilience, recovery, and reconstruction, helping our member states to meet the physical and psychological needs of the millions of refugees who have sought safety there, and measures to ensure accountability to Russia's crimes, not least by addressing the unlawful transfer and deportation of Ukrainian children, supporting Ukraine's Prosecutor General in the investigation of serious human rights violations, and establishing a unique register of damage, which will very soon begin recording loss and harm on the ground as a necessary step towards a future compensation mechanism. But while Ukraine is an urgent priority, we are also addressing the long-term issues. On the environment, we are fully aware of the triple planetary crisis posed by pollution, climate change, and the loss of biodiversity, and the threat that this poses to the way in which we live. That is why we are now developing new instruments on human rights and the environment, and the protection of environment through criminal law. On artificial intelligence, we are determined that people should be able to harness the very real benefits this will continue to bring, while being protected from the equally real risks. That means regulating AI so that it upholds our rights and does not undermine them. For this, we are at work on a new cross-cutting convention that will be open for signature later this year. Made in Europe, it will also be open to the world, so that its benefits extend to people far beyond our continent borders, and will, I hope, function in harmony with the already mentioned European Union's AI Act. As it seeks to ensure trustworthy artificial intelligence within the EU 27. Lastly, our transversal approach to AI also covers the conduct of elections and election campaigns. They are the foundation and founding stones of democracy, and it is vital to uphold their integrity. Without that, faith in our democratic future will be shaken to its core. That is why, more broadly, our standard setting, monitoring, and cooperation work have all adapted over the course of decades to protect the integrity of Europe's elections and referendums. And our Parliamentary Assembly and Congress of Local and Regional Authorities have observed literally hundreds of these. This work must go on, all of it. So I'm pleased that European leaders endorsed our approach when they gathered for our Summit of Heads of State and Government in Reykjavik last May. They recommitted to our values and standards and to our action in pushing forward the boundaries of what we have achieved. Despite all the problems we face, we should reflect on how far Europe has come in a few rather short decades. How much better life is for so many, and how much more we can achieve if we have the will to do so. And the ideas, and here we come to the Ideas Lab, to make it happen. So I wish you all a stimulating and successful 2 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria.
So we have probably 5 minutes for some questions, because the Council of Europe, as you said at the beginning, is sometimes not sufficiently well known in this town, but plays a very important role and has a much broader membership than the European Union. The European Union struggles sometimes with membership discussions for years. We know this for some of your members in the Western Balkans, but apparently the Council of Europe overcomes this. Anybody who wants to raise a point, let's say, because there are certain issues which the Council of Europe discusses, which you want to hear the Secretary General's view about? Yes, please, if you could introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. My name is Mohammed Rajai Barakat. I am a Euro-Arab citizen. I have the Belgian nationality. I heard Mrs. Minister, Mrs. Hajj Al Habib, and I heard now what you said. I'm not going to comment about what she said because she's not here. But as Council of Europe and as European Union, you used to send many organizations and to fund many NGOs so as to defend human rights, democracy, and the European values. What are you going to do now with what's happening in the Middle East, in Palestine, Gaza, and others, with the massacres who are taking place now? I used to defend the values of European Union, but now I am unable to discuss with Arabs about what's happening now. When I say I am European and I am proud to defend democracy, rights of women, children, they said to me, well, they are polite. Close your mouth. You are lying about, we used to hear to you and we believed you, but now it's too late. Thank you very much.
Well,
It's on, it's on. This one is on.
well, the remit of the Council of Europe is clearly defined in the statute. It's 46 European states. So unfortunately, our work, our convention, does not apply to the countries which are not members of the Council of Europe. So I cannot agree with you that the Council of Europe is to be taken responsible. However, you know, as I mentioned for some of the conventions that we are devising, there are a number of conventions that are open conventions and cover the whole world. One is the cybercrime. So we do work outside of our boundaries, and we do care for the human rights and other values that we stand for around the world. In particular, for instance, when it comes to the death penalty, the biggest achievement of the Council of Europe is that Europe today is and Europe of the Council of Europe, 46 member states, it's the death penalty free zone, which was not the case even in very developed Western countries just a few decades ago. So we did achieve a lot. And when it comes to the death penalty, we are very vocal on the global scheme. When it comes to also open conventions and our work with the outside of Europe member states, we also are vocal. So we do care about our neighborhood, and we do have some, but rather limited, nothing to compare to European Union projects in the part of the world you are talking about. So I was very clear when on the 7th of October, the Hamas, the terrorist attack happened on Israel, but I was also very vocal just 2 days ago on what happens in Gaza. So the Council of Europe can voice its shock on what is going on, but unfortunately we are not the international organization that can tackle the issue. But I agree with you, it's a huge humanitarian catastrophe, what is ongoing there. And I really hope, and my call from the beginning, as I mentioned, Council of Europe was based on the premise of never again in Europe. The Council of Europe was based on work on peace. So whenever we voice something in Europe or outside of Europe, is always calling for dialogue and peaceful resolution of conflicts. So that was the line that was taken from the very beginning.
Thank you, very clear answer. Anybody else who wants to raise a point on the Council of Europe? Any other questions? I mean, anyway, I agree with you. Let's say sometimes it's forgotten in this town. You're the oldest European institution. Of course, in the post-war period, there was, in the pre and the interbellum, there were other institutions, but you are 75 years old and you have a much broader membership and you have started on another mandate than the European Union was. And the European Union started on this mandate of creating a single market, which we may also have often forgotten because that was, c'était le marché commun, which we wanted to create. There was not of these other tasks which you had in the Council of Europe.
One thing is interesting, and I think it was forward-looking with the forefathers of the Council of Europe. The only area, and for a very specific reason, that was excluded in the statute, what we can't do, is the defense. And because the same year, the NATO was created. So the only reason why this was created, and it was quite clear from how it was drafted, was that the Council of Europe can do everything, but literally everything else, if we have capacity. Of course, we don't do everything. But defense is the only area where we would cross the line. But at that time, for very obvious reasons. Now, in the situation which we live, I think we talk about security, and I was very clear, but when we talk about security, it's democratic security. But, and later on, I will speak to you, and I will mention, you know, how it came that Council of Europe excluded Russia, because we were 47, and we were proudly 47, thinking believing, and Václav Havel was mentioned here, many of people who were leaders from all around Europe at the time were wishing and thinking that united Europe and Europe for peace and Europe of cooperation was possible. But we see what happens when a country departs completely from the values and standards that European Union, Council of Europe stand for. So we had no choice than exclude the biggest country in the world and, of course, the bigger member state, and from what is ensuing so clearly. So it started as a backsliding of democracy, human rights, rule of law, and everything else. And it is now what we see, the horrible illegal aggression with so many people suffering and being killed, injured, or lost their homes, and in some ways you can say also the future. So yes, we are not dealing with defense, but in fact, for what we do actually is very preventive and preemptive for what may happen if there is no cooperation and the countries become completely or reverse completely their democratic development.
If there is somebody else who wants to raise a point, because we'll need to move on. Yeah, there's a question over there. If you please introduce yourself, and then we will stop it here because we need to move on. Yes, please.
Yes, Holger Hoos, Alexander von Humboldt Professor for Artificial Intelligence from nearby Aachen in Germany. You said many things that I found very impressive. One of them was a clear recognition that artificial intelligence is one of the largest technological revolutions of our age. Still unclear how far this will get us, but there's concern and there's hope. And I thank you for actually emphasizing both the concern and the hope. My question is this: what is the Council of Europe's position regarding the increasing technological sovereignty that we are losing now in a very alarming rate because we are unable in Europe to produce AI services and systems that are desperately needed in order to fuel that transformation in our own economies. And as a result, of course, these economies are becoming very much dependent on artificial intelligence technology and services developed elsewhere, in part based on values that differ markedly from our own, especially in important areas such as education and healthcare. Thank you.
Well, I cannot really say that because we don't deal with enterprising and research and scientific development, but I cannot more than agree with your assessment. What we do, and actually I didn't mention it, we are at the very end, I think, as we speak. It's the last round of negotiations for our AI and human rights and the rule of law. So what we try to achieve with this open convention, we have, even in the negotiations, a bigger number of civil society, including some of the companies that are your sponsors that are participating in that. We have all North American states, number of from South America. We have Japan, we have Australia, we have Israel, we have many countries at the table who are not Europeans, which means that really, if we achieve this, this will be, apart from AI Act for Europe of 27, we will have the first international AI Act. And we actually are, as I said, want to harness the benefits, and I think no one can deny that. Generation I pertain to was seeing birth of the net of the nets. I was studying in this country where it just started, and I can tell you that at that time I was carrying with me several hundreds of kilos of papers that I photocopied here in Brussels in order to finish my studies in Warsaw at that time, because the College of Europe had a place there. Nowadays, you would not think of that. That would be just a very crazy idea. Just to say how far we went. So I certainly belong, and many of you, as far as I can see more or less what generations we are, we were living in a happy world where technology was for years bringing only such a huge, huge success, starting with research, that you can get the knowledge that otherwise was limited to the place to be. If you are here, you access to libraries that you have in Brussels if you were somewhere else. So it was, in the time when I was studying, it was really a huge and an unimaginable benefit to be able to harness, to get the benefits of that. I think last, in my view, 10 or more years, we started to see the downside and the big risks. And I can tell you, I was one of those who was at Bletchley Park at the AI Summit. And my takeaway from there was, when I came back, I just said to colleagues, we have to do this convention now. Because every day, the generative AI is really developing. I mean, you know that very well because you are very informed public. It's developing daily, and everyone becomes scary, I think, of what it may bring. So certain rules have to apply. And in order to apply, and that there I come to the role of those who are outside of Europe, we all have to abide by the rules. And the whole end of negotiations now in Strasbourg for AI convention is the scope, because AI Act is very clear of the scope. We will not achieve possibility to have outside of Europe at this stage if we completely mirror what AI Act is. So I hope we will have a compromise to move, because every day is a lost day. We have to have international treaty that will really regulate what is possible and what shouldn't be. And actually the convention covers the whole cycle of AI, from conception to how do you dispose it when it's gone.
Interesting also that you show by this the complementarity between the EU and the Council of Europe, let's say, on different things. Of course, they work with different methods, different ways of harmonizing, but there's certainly a way by which it is important.
Actually, at the table, we have Commission, Commission who is negotiating on behalf of EU member states. So, of course, we are two organizations started based, I think, on the same values, but different in membership and different in what we do. But we do, and I will tell you later, we do, EU is one of our major partner, be it political, financial, or strategic. So it's very important, and we do things together. But not always easy.
I can imagine. I can imagine. We know this, Maria. No. So let me thank Maria for her intervention, for her participation today. And also helping us to highlight the issues, let's say, the Council of Europe is working on. And also thank you for the questions which there were. I want to invite my colleague to come to the scene. Let's say, we have the Brussels, we're moving back to the Brussels bubble, Maria, and we have Steven with the Executive Vice President Dombrovskis. Steven.
Thanks, Kyle. Hello. Yeah, merci. Executive Prime Minister, this is a conflation of previous tasks you've had with the current one. Executive Vice President Dombrovskis, welcome to the Ideas Lab. It's a pleasure to have you back, in fact. I'll dive straight into it. This morning, during the warm-up session, we talked a lot about voters' preferences and what prognosticated, in a way, what mobilized them to come to the ballot. And those topics were very much on security and defense. We've just now heard an entire block about democracy, human rights, etc. We turn to what in previous years has always been said is the core of any democratic process and voters' preferences, the economy. It turns out it's not all about the economy, stupid. But nevertheless, these topics are very much entwined, of course. Global trade, European growth and competitiveness. And so I would like to talk a little bit about the position of the European Union in a very volatile geopolitical context and how it positions itself on trade and investment policies in particular. You're just back from the ministerial conference, the 13th organized in the WTO context. Is it really that bad as we think it is about the WTO rule of law and our rules-based international order where the EU can position itself? What are the main outcomes in a positive way for you?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting to this CEPS Ideas Lab event. So on the question on WTO 13th Ministerial Conference, MC13, indeed it finished more than one day over time, and it delivered some positive outcomes, but also certain disappointment on some other outcomes. So maybe let me start with some of the positive outcomes from the ministerial. First of all, the agreement was reached also, I would say, in the last hours of the conference to extend the e-commerce moratorium, or the moratorium for customs duties on electronic transmissions for another 2 years till the next ministerial. And that's certainly an important element, as digital trade now, or e-commerce now, constitutes some 25% of the all trade and only growing in importance. So correspondingly, that provides some clarity and predictability for businesses, at least for the next 2 years. We managed to integrate in the WTO rulebook the agreement, which was before plurilateral agreement on services domestic regulation. So about providing predictability and removing obstacles for provision of services cross-border. So another important topic, because it's exactly the administrative qualification requirements, which is one of the main obstacles for cross-border provision of services. So there is a good result to address and to reduce that burden. There are good results in terms of development package, so providing a more smooth pathway for least developed countries once they are graduating from that status, that they are not abruptly losing the trade preferences they are having as least developed countries. There is agreement on investment facilitation for development, which is, so we reached a political agreement on this, again, plurilateral initiative. So now it's important to integrate it in WTO rulebook, and we hope that procedural obstacles will not hold it back, as some members were raising some points. We took note on the progress made so far on the WTO's dispute settlement system and agreed to ensure that we have fully functioning dispute settlement by the end of the year, even though we still need to clarify the specific points on appeals review of dispute settlements. So those are maybe some of the positive elements I would like to highlight from the ministerial conference. What were probably the disappointments? That we reached no meaningful results on agriculture, and that we did not reach agreement on phase 2 fisheries subsidies agreement. So these 2 areas definitely require future work. But all in all, to come a bit to your general question, from the European Union side, we are convinced that we need to support WTO. We need a WTO to underpin rules-based multilateral trading system. And actually, it's a WTO's most favored nation principle, which is much behind the resilience of global trade in the current times of geopolitical turbulence. So it already, we see, plays its strong positive role, and from the EU side, we think that it's best that we continue to sustain this rules-based multilateral trading system.
Yeah. the WTO is alive and well, is what I hear. Even if the obstacles are huge in a way. If I sketch it, however, and take a few steps back and look at the rivalry, of course, which is dominating global trade relations, and where trade frictions are escalating, US decoupling, of course, China succeeding, I think, in rallying several countries around the world into concluding low tariff, high investment FTAs, thereby building a sort of backup multilateral trading system if the WTO goes belly up. It seems that the advances which have been made in Abu Dhabi are small, bureaucratic almost in nature, given the overriding tensions that are there in this world. There's a Chinese idiom that says, you can sleep in the same bed, but still have very different dreams. And I think this is exactly what is happening. The EU, in between these strange bedfellows, how it is really trying to advance what you say is a rules-based multilateral trading system. How concretely can this be done?
First of all, I would not call the advances we made at MC13 small. It's all meaningful progress in a number of areas. Well, I also noted, obviously, the absence of progress in some other areas. But all in all, WTO continues to provide underpinning for rules-based multilateral trade, and that's important because you mentioned bilateral trade agreements or regional trade agreements. I'll come to this, but also with all the bilateral and regional trade agreements which are currently in place. 75% of global trade takes place under WTO rules, and more than half of EU trade takes place under WTO rules, even though EU has a most comprehensive network of free trade agreements in the world. It's true that now different regions, different countries are also advancing bilateral or regional trade agreements, and I would say that's positive. There are also certain WTO rules how those trade agreements should be made, also to minimize some fragmentation risks. So it's important when advancing those bilateral regional deals, we also follow kind of the general WTO principles on how those deals are to be made. Well, when we discuss specifically US and China, well, for the EU, obviously, those are the two largest trading partners. US is our largest trading partner. We trade something like 1.6 trillion euros a year, and it's underpinned by some 5 trillion euros of mutual investment. So it's the largest trade and investment relationship in the world. We are also strategic partners and allies in this geopolitical situation we are currently facing. So obviously, this relation is of high importance for us. On China, China is our second largest trading partner. However, in case of China, what we are seeing is that our trade relationship is very unbalanced, with EU running a very large trade deficit. So in our discussions with China, we focus on market access barriers and how to actually improve this balance and reciprocity in our economic and trade relations. Well, you mentioned the word decoupling, as I understand in US context. Indeed, well, some time ago there was lots of talk in the US on decoupling from China, but it's worth noting that in between also US moved to the same terminology we are using the EU. They are not talking about decoupling anymore, they are talking about de-risking. And it's true, that's something we had been positioning from the EU side, that given importance of our trade and economic relationship, we are not talking about decoupling, but at the same time we must address certain economic security risks, avoid strategic dependency. So that's our concept of de-risking.
I wanted to talk about this economic security package a little more. A few weeks ago, this year, 5 new instruments were added to a package which was already characterized by the very poignant anti-coercion instrument, which incidentally was created in response to the threats and later actions by the Trump administration to slap tariffs on imported steel and aluminium, but which then got a new lease on life in the face of economic coercion by China. All of this seems to suggest a rebalancing of the EU's trade positioning in this volatile world that we talked about before, which of course opens it up also to new risks and vulnerabilities. I wonder to what extent this anti-coercion instrument will really be effective if Trump comes back to the White House and actually implements, as he has been suggesting on the campaign trail, a 10% markup of tariffs for all trading partners of the US and at least 60% for Chinese. How will the EU how resilient is the EU to actually cope with this, and is the economic security toolbox really resilient enough in itself?
Yeah. Indeed, if you look at our new, or by now already not so new, trade policy strategy, it has 3 keywords: open, sustainable, assertive. And then here we're talking about this assertive part, so we had been clear that we'll be more assertive in defending our interests and rights when others are not playing by the rules. As this means more systematically using our trade, defense and enforcement toolbox, but also developing our autonomous tools. There one can mention actually a number of tools which had been so to say, finalized and entering into force since then. The updated enforcement regulation, anti-coercion instrument, which you mentioned, the international procurement instrument, foreign subsidies instrument, just to give you some examples. So we have this toolbox, and so it's now in our disposal to use it should the situation require so. As regards anti-coercion instruments, so it entered into force at the end of the last year. Well, currently I would say it's untested instrument, so we have not used it at any given situation. But it's there. So should the necessity come, we would be able to use it. Whether it would specifically address the situation you mentioned on some countries or some administrations just starting to put tariffs indiscriminately against its trading partners, well, that would require a further analysis, because how we define economic coercion, it's a third country is trying to force EU or some of its member states to do or not to do certain policy action or certain concrete decisions. That is how we define economic coercion, that with a threat of withdrawing trade or investment preferences or withdrawal of trade and investment preferences, the third country seeks to achieve certain policy decisions or absence of those decisions in the EU or its member states. That's why I said it remains to be seen if somebody just, throws tariffs across the board, whether that would amount to economic coercion. But okay, on this we also have our experience during the Trump administration. We know that they imposed the so-called 232 tariffs on steel and aluminium. And what we did, we retaliated against those tariffs, making also very clear that we are ready to defend our interests if some others are just blatantly violating them.
Yeah, I think it goes back to my initial point, in fact, about WTO reform. If we're up against those type of pressures by our partners as well as our systemic rivals, we're kind of caught in the middle. And so what can the EU really do in order to instill, to convince those other major trading blocs to play the games in modernizing the WTO?
Well, first of all, we think that it's for everyone's interest to have the rules-based international trading system and not the system where might is right. And it's everyone's interest to avoid economic fragmentation. There are also estimates on the cost of economic fragmentation, what would happen if trade would concentrate among, geopolitical blocs. And the assessment is that that can take something like 5 to 7% of the global GDP. And if you take 7%, it's a combined share in a global GDP of Germany and France. So it's just the effect of just taking those two economies out of the map. And also effect is unevenly distributed, with developing countries actually being most affected. So there is significant cost in not preserving this multilateral system. So therefore, indeed, from the EU side, we had been very insistent on WTO reform across all three core functions of WTO: negotiation, monitoring and deliberation, and dispute settlement. And we have made good progress already for in a run-up to MC13 on the overall WTO reform process. The outstanding question is indeed the appeals review, where the appellate body currently is being blocked by US, and we understand the criticism and are ready to ensure that the reformed appellate body addresses the problems identified on judicial overreach, on respecting the deadlines, and so on and so forth. But clearly, it's a view of the vast majority of members of the WTO that we need to have functioning two-stage dispute settlement system, so including with the possibility of appeal. So hopefully we will see more progress still during this year, as was agreed now at the WTO 13th Ministerial Conference. And in between, we have also certain tools for dealing with appeal stage, like a multi-party interim appeal arrangement, which is in place. Also, there is a possibility to create ad hoc appeal arbitration panels. So there are some tools which can be used also right now in absence of the functioning appellate body.
We will have some time for questions and answers after, but I would be remiss if I wouldn't bring Ukraine back into the conversation. You have, at the end of January, proposed the extension of the existing suspension of quotas and duties for Ukrainian imports into the single market. This is now gone into Council. The European Parliament's INTA committee will vote on it later this week, and then perhaps it will pass in first reading in April to be in time to kick in June for a period of a year. In the meantime, we see the Polish farmers back protesting on the Ukrainian border, even spilling grain from trucks and trains. And so the problem seems to have gone from bad to worse, despite the carve-outs and the emergency breaks which have been proposed by the Commission in this respect. What is worse is that in political terms, this seems to be supported by polling which has been taken by an authoritative Polish newspaper by 70 80+% of the population and across the political spectrum, including, therefore, the new Tusk-led government. And so politically, there seems to be very little leeway in Poland to change this, whereas actually the bane of the problem might not actually lie in the economics of the grain imports into the single market, which have been absorbed and do not create adverse effects on the Polish economy, but rather with broader questions about the Commission's Green Deal agenda into sustainable farming, fallow land, etc. How to square this circle, or should I say triangle, security defense issues, social issues, and green agenda?
Yeah, well, that's a very broad question. So let me start maybe with specifically Ukrainian grain question you raised, because it's clear that from the EU we are committed, and we had been restating it numerous occasions, to continue to provide all necessary support to Ukraine so it can defend itself and can win the war against Russia. And this support stems across different areas, political support, financial support, economic support, where the trade part obviously comes in, also military support, and probably it's clear that there is an urgent need in terms of military support, in terms of ammunition, where we really need to step up as a collective West. And provide this support on financial support side. Our 50 billion euro Ukraine facility is now in place, and we hope to be able to make first disbursement in coming weeks. So turning to economic support, indeed we have proposed our autonomous trade measures, so unilateral trade liberalization for Ukraine, and we now have proposed extending this autonomous trade measures for another year till June 2025. If we now zoom in the question of grain, we had been already in intensive discussions with the Polish and some other member states governments in the first half of the year. We managed also to find some agreement how to address it so that those countries could withdraw their unilateral restrictions. Unfortunately, we now see that 3 out of the 5 most affected countries are again applying unilateral restrictions. Will
the Commission take action?
Well, I'm coming to all of this. So, first of all, we understand the concerns. So, when we now, and that's why we prefer to resolve this issue through dialogue instead of rushing to infringement procedures, even though we had warned the member states if the situation persists, it may lead to the infringement procedures. That's known, and those member states had been officially notified about this. So, first, there is a functioning system, export notification system, which we helped in a sense to set up, which allows to prevent some kind of surges of grain or other imports from Ukraine. And this system already functions in the case of Romania and Bulgaria, which have not introduced unilateral measures, but seem to have actually less problems in this regard. Second, in our new proposal for autonomous trade measures, we propose a possibility to have safeguard measures not only in a case of disturbances of the EU market as a whole, but also in case of disturbances on one or few member states, because we know that, well, the effects of this Ukrainian grain are geographically very unevenly distributed across the EU. So, we have proposed also for some sensitive agricultural products to introduce limits for tariff-free access to EU market, which is average export levels of 2022-2023. So when we now come specifically to the grain, well, the interesting part is that Poland has unilaterally banned the import of Ukrainian grain. So the question, what those protests are taking what those protests are again, and why this grain is being spilled from trucks or for railway carriages, because it cannot be imports to Poland, because imports to Poland are unilaterally banned by Poland. So there one would need to have more in-depth look what is actually going on, and why the farmers are protesting against something which is already banned. And the question, even if EU whatever were to follow, to ban something which is already banned. So that's obviously a question mark here. What is really behind all this? But obviously we're engaged with Polish authorities, and the best would be to find a solution through the dialogue, because the political will is there from all sides, including from Poland, to continue supporting Ukraine.
Thanks very much. I'm being nudged by my colleagues to rush a little bit to move to the next speaker, your colleague, Maros Šefčovič. Do not despair, ladies and gentlemen, or guests, I should say, of the Ideas Lab. There is a lab session which is specifically devoted to the geopolitical, geoeconomic issues right after the break, so we'll have more time to discuss what you've already heard here. I would like to thank you, Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Valdis Dombrovskis, for coming to the Ideas Lab and devoting your time, and thanking you also for the answer to my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Also from my side, I hope you can hear me. It is a great pleasure to be here with you today, and given that our schedules are quite tight, I would like to invite on stage Maros Šefčovič, Executive Vice President for the European Green Deal, Interinstitutional Relations and Foresight. Welcome, Mr. Šefčovič. He doesn't need much introduction. He has been serving the European Commission for 15 years.
Too long, you know.
At the highest level. So, and he has been dealing with a lot of responsibilities. And now one of the key responsibilities is really to lead the European Commission work on the European Green Deal, and the aim to become the first continent which is climate neutral by 2050. So I think this is a great responsibility, and this is the issue that I would like to discuss with you. Let me start, without further ado, on a question which I think is in the mind of several people in the room. So the European Green Deal was announced in 2019. A lot of things have changed. We had dramatic events, we had a pandemic, a war is in the backyard of Europe, we had a painful energy crisis. With all these changes, can we still consider the Green Deal as the guiding principle of the EU growth strategy?
Thank you very much, Inzia, and I know that we have to catch up the time, because I understand that we are a little bit behind the schedule, so I will try to be as brief as possible. You know, I have quite busy Monday, so this is, I think, today my third event, and you will not be surprised that the topic of the discussions I have everywhere is, of course, the future of the Green Deal, but especially, you know, how to make sure that this green transition and transformation is done in a fair, just manner, and how can we bring more of a business case for the Green Deal for the future. And to come back to your question, I think that if you look at this enormously fierce competition we have right now, not only in political terms, but also in this new geoeconomics. What we are competing the most about? We are competing about all technologies of the future. Who would have more performing photovoltaic panels? I was just at the solar summit, so I'm still under the impression. Then, of course, who would make the best, electric vehicles, the more potent batteries? Who can produce the cheapest green hydrogen? Who will master the art of hydrolysis? And of course, how can we make sure that all the renewable electricity, which is generated by the renewable sources, actually be transported by the grids to the final consumer? So once you build up the wind park or solar farm, that you will not have to wait for 1 year or 2 years until it's currently hooked to the system, because the grid operators are worried if they can manage this intermittency and volatility of the sources. So this is where we compete. And of course, it implies critical raw materials. It implies, I would say, this what I would call renaissance of the nuclear power, nuclear energy in our energy mix. So I think that it's quite clear that we are not having the competitions about the old technologies. We are competing about the new technologies, which are absolutely inherently linked with the Green Deal. So I would say that clearly the Green Deal and its parameters are absolutely key for the competitiveness of the European economy. We just have to make sure that we do it right, that the industry would perceive it as a sector worth investing in. We need to bring much more of the private capital, and I think we need to make stronger business case for this green transition and transformation. And last thing I would say, we need much better engagement with the public. And I think especially when we have seen the protests of our farmers over the last couple of weeks, we need to explain better. We need to have much more empathy, to listen to their concerns, to their worries, clearly to distinguish what is linked with the green transformation, what is the problem of our policy sectors, just to explain that the climate change will not leave. It will be here with more devastating consequences, and we just simply have a response to it. We just need to adjust it to this new geoeconomic and geopolitical reality.
So I understand your question. The Green Deal is still relevant. Now, the second question is about the money. We know it's not everything about the money, but money is important. So there are estimates about the investment needs, and we are seeing numbers ranging from 500 to 600 billion a year. Plus, you mentioned the protest, so it's clear that the green transition may lead to short-term redistributional cost. How are we going to do it? And how can we mobilize resources for achieving the objectives of the Green Deal?
Yeah, for this, I think our French colleagues and friends, they have good expressions. L'argent, c'est la nerf de la guerre. So if it comes to the real thing, you always have to discuss the money. And of course, the green transition and the green transformation is clearly one of the areas. Because from one perspective, indeed, the expectations of how much money is to be invested are enormous. And therefore, your question is absolutely legitimate, and that's the topic which is discussed on all political levels in a clean transition dialogues, which we are now organizing in the Commission, and where also our President Ursula von der Leyen is taking very active part. And also, I would say the change of perspective, how we should look at the necessary investment into this transition. So what I want to say, the first and foremost, is where the money can be coming from. So I'm just using the example of the last 2 years, especially when we've been at the peak of energy crisis at that time, and this is just from top of my head, so there might be some decimal differences, but roughly 600 billion we paid for fossil imports, and 400 billion euros we paid for energy subsidies. So we spent 1 trillion euro in 1 year for the energy which we needed. I absolutely agree with that. But we spent 1 trillion for the energy which was burned, spent, gone away. Isn't it better to invest the money in the project, in the energies which would stay here, which would deliver us what we need? And this is just one example. But coming back to your question, indeed, the need for investment is so huge that it's quite clear, and I think the head of states and government of the European Union understand that very well. Therefore, this is such an intense debate ongoing right now about what would be one of the most important summits Europe has over the last 10 years, about setting strategic agenda for the next 5 years, which will take place in April. And the leaders are discussing this issue because it's very clear that we cannot fund or finance this green transition just from the public sources. Simply, that's not possible. So we have to learn how to do it differently. I mean, when I was in the United States, I mean, they, of course, we are teasing each other always a little bit. So that was, you have the most comprehensive, state-of-the-art, best legislation for the Green Deal in the world. But we have a business case. And therefore, we have to complement our legislative framework with a business case. How to do that? I mean, first and foremost, I think that we have to develop more widely what I called competitive sustainability principle, meaning that we should reward the companies which produce with low carbon footprint in a sustainable way, which treat their employees decently, and not to punish them that once the public procurement is over, we always go for the cheapest, very often Asian alternative. If you're going to continue to do it like this, then we will have real problem with European industry. And we want to have Europe which is industrial. We want that our business leaders would hear this message loud and clear. We not only want you to stay, we want you to prosper, to develop, because Europe is what it is today because it was always industrial continent. And for us, it's absolute priority to make sure that whatever happens in geopolitics, that also in coming decades, Europe would be always among the 3 most important economic powers. And therefore, I think we will need to look at trade policy, state aid policy, financing instrument through these new optics. I'm very encouraged by the recent developments in the European Investment Bank. I was invited to talk at the EIB forum, and I was pleading with my friends at the EIB, look, you are the biggest public bank in the world. They are bigger than the World Bank. They're bigger than IMF, the biggest public bank in the world. And we need your help to leverage the public finance. We need your help to bring the other segments of the financial sectors, to create the appealing products for the pension funds, for capital markets in Europe, that they would not invest in the stocks at the New York Stock Exchange, but here in Europe to fund our energy transition. And it's doable, and we have the examples like this happening already today. So we would need also to kind of change the optics, work on the business case for our Green Deal, make sure that we would be more reactive to the feedback we are getting from the industry, and each of these clean industrial dialogues which we had with energy-intensive industry, hydrogen producers, clean tech, critical raw materials producers. I'm ending with one request, and I can extend that request to you as well. If you see something in our legislation or something in our practice which makes your life hard, which creates technological block, which makes it impossible for your business case in especially this sustainable sector to thrive, let us know. We're putting it on one piece of the paper, and we are ready to look at it, to change, recalibrate if needed, because we need private initiative, private investment, more private equity to come in and to leverage with the public funding, which is still quite important if you look that in these 10 years we are investing around 1 trillion euros in the green transition. But we have to do it in conjunction, in cooperation, just to make sure that the money flows will be coming into the green sector.
Thank you very much for your answer and for highlighting the importance of involving the private sector and to get basically the industry on board in this process. Now, we spoke a bit about a high level. Now, maybe a bit of the short term and what concretely can be done. I mean, the mandate of the Commission is now reaching towards the end, but of course, climate doesn't wait. So what kind of actions can be taken in the immediate in order to continue to move towards the green transition?
I think that, of course, the immediate priority is to make sure, and here I would like to thank our Belgian friends, Belgian presidency, to complete, I would say, the files which are on the table. And I think there are still quite a few important pieces of the legislations which I'm sure with the help of our Belgian friends will manage to conclude. And then, of course, something which I would call for myself, I gave it as a working title, to make sure that we have real single market for the Green Deal. Because of the, two wars so close to our border, because of COVID-19 and energy crisis, I mean, we simply be not always making sure that all the rules for, let's say, having the electrons flowing freely across the borders, making the interconnectors working better, so on and so forth, and I can give a lot of examples like that, are properly implemented. So let's work on these issues as well. And then, of course, if you look at it from the perspective that the Green Deal as a framework, as a legislative and political framework is more or less completed. Now we are in the field of, or in the time of implementation. You are working in Brussels, so you know what are the implementing acts, delegated acts, and all the implementing measures. And we have to make sure that we will be implementing the Green Deal in a way which is fair, just, socially responsible, and also business friendly and attractive for the investors. And that's, I would say, nitty-gritty hard work. Therefore, I appreciate that we have these very intense interactions with the companies and CEOs across Europe, with the sectors which are most affected by the green transition, because it's very important for us. And then, of course, we also have to show the empathy and understanding also for our farmers, because when I look at the figures over the last 2 years, the fact is that just for the grain sector, they lost from one year into another 20 billion euros. That's a lot of money. So I mean, you kind of miss it in the system. Again, what can be done? How we can show the understanding, empathy, and look for the solution for I would say this year, but also how to launch the debate, and this is about the industry, but also about the agriculture, to set, I would say, the framework, to present the case for the next political cycle, because I'm sure that the next 5 years would be absolutely crucial. It will bring us to 2030, where we have all these very ambitious targets on the table. I think that this fierce competition in economic sphere and in trade will continue. I think that we will still have the high tension close to our border, and I think it would be the 5 years where we have to demonstrate to the whole world and to ourselves that we as Europeans can stand on our own legs, that we have autonomy to act, and that we will be pushing for bigger strategic autonomy, because this is, I think, what is absolutely expected and this situation required from the European Union.
this is your last point actually led me to the very last question, and then we close. I imagine people are becoming impatient to get a coffee. But I think, I mean, in a few weeks, us European citizens will be called to elect the new parliament. I mean, the electoral outcome is going to be uncertain. And the priorities and preferences may be moving away from the principles or the idea of the Green Deal. I mean, what is your view, and what are the challenges, but also the opportunity that should not be overlooked?
I think that there are several things, and if you bear with me for 2-3 minutes before you get your coffee, I think that the first very important thing is that when you talk to the citizens, and I do that a lot, I mean, there is absolute consensus that they would like to have bluer skies, cleaner water, more forests around them, and they're absolutely aware of the dangers of the climate change. Nobody needs any kind of persuasion just looking at the last year with all the wildfires and water floods, and the fact that we for the first time crossed this 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold. So on that we still have, I would say, very strong public support and public acceptance that you need to tackle climate change. What the people are afraid, how this is going to affect them in a short term. What does it mean for my household? What does it mean for my garage? What does it mean for my boiler? And I think here we have to simply show much more empathy that we are not only ready to give or propose what should be done, but we are also ready to listen to them, and that with these measures which we are proposing, there is always very strong social justice element part of it. So we have to speak much more that we are creating the social climate fund in the realm of 87 billion euros, which will be there for the most vulnerable citizens in the society. That we are proposing the measures which would make cities more livable, and that we simply want to create actually the millions or high-valued jobs across the Europe, because these new clean technologies requires high-quality workforce, which we have in Europe, and we would need them more, with high salaries and with, of course, huge perspective for the future. So I would say to turn it around from I would say discussions which sometimes we have on the discussion of how the Green Deal is important for the I would say personal perspective of all of us. And maybe a last point, if you allow, because of course there will be also a big discussions between those who support Europe and European Union and those who are very skeptical about the European Union and about this future. I think especially over the last 5 years, I don't think that we could have more clear and pointing examples how important it is to be united in the European Union. Look what's happening around us, look what's happening on the geopolitical scale. Look how global trade was dramatically transformed. Look how big powers are ready to use all kinds of means to push for the national interest. We have to learn our lessons, and I would say more pressures there are on Europe, more united we have to be in the European Union. I'm talking about ourselves within the Union, but also I'm talking about our neighbors who wants to be the members of the European Union. And I think that would be the key challenge for the next Commission. But I believe that from this perspective, it's quite clear that if we work together, if we are united, we can accomplish anything, and that should be the message to our citizens.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, and please join me in, for a round of applause.
And now the coffee. Thank you.
So now there is a coffee break, and we resume at quarter to 4. Upstairs for the parallel session.
Yes, the lab sessions will start at 1:45. The names of the rooms or the numbers of the rooms are indicated on your app.